Former federal prosecutor, now working the defense side of the table. And you did make the prediction, as Katz, you occasionally do, many months ago, when the Hunter Biden thing was just sort of one of those boiling stories. You said Joe Biden will, regardless of what we're reading, regardless of what's being said, when the dust settles, he will pardon Hunter Biden. And indeed, that's what happened. Was there anything about the pardon that we should know? It apparently is quite the sweeping pardon, David Katz.
Well, one of the clues back then was how he and his lawyers handled the situation in Delaware federal court. Remember, Hunter was offered a misdemeanor and then pretrial diversion, and that was going to wrap up everything. They got into an argument in court. The Republican appointed district judge asked some questions, from the right-wing point of view. It blew up when the facts came out. But they weren't really in agreement, the lawyers there, as to what the main thing was. How far did the plea agreement go? Did it bar Hunter from being charged with anything? The so-called Burisma, the so-called China link, the quote Biden crime family. It didn't give him any protection over any of that. But you thought, what did he need protection for any of that? Looking back at it then, and so the fact that he so cavalierly let that blow up in court, knowing that he could then be charged with federal felonies as he was, led me to believe that he strongly suspected, I'm not saying he and his dad had explicitly agreed, but that Hunter strongly suspected that even if he threw the dice, even if he did get charged with felonies, even if it went against him, as it was likely to do, purely based on the evidence. I'm not talking about whether he was selectively prosecuted, but just based on the evidence against him. It sure looked like he would be convicted of the felony, trivial as it was in Delaware about the gun application, and that he would also be convicted of the tax charges, federal criminal tax charges in Los Angeles. He had eventually pleaded guilty to that. But my point, Mark, was that the way nobody would turn down, in my opinion, that deal that was just to get a misdemeanor and pretrial diversion and resolve the whole case with no jail time, unless they were pretty sure that they were never going to go to jail because their dad was the president, and that if it really came to that, and of course the timing of the pardons right now is that they occurred just before the sentencing would have occurred in Delaware, which I don't think would have resulted in him getting prison time. But I think here in Los Angeles, in front of Judge Skarsky, who ended up making the statement in court just the other day that he did not think that there had been selective prosecution, he would have gotten jail time in that case, Mark. If it wasn't a selective prosecution, evading over $1 million in taxes. That's not saying that you earned $1 million and you owe the taxes on $1 million. He owed over $1 million in taxes, and on that, even on a guilty plea, even with extenuating circumstances, he would have gone to prison. Now, in terms of and he would have gone to prison, I believe, for over a year would have been the sentence out here in Los Angeles.
And just to be clear, he did pay that. He paid those back taxes back, did he not?
Well, that was, everything about this case is anomalous, and a lot of commentators pick one side and they kind of marshal the facts that come out on that side. And Mark, I try to really get it not right, not left, but right, not wrong. And so the extenuating the unusual circumstance there is that he had a financial angel from Hollywood come forward and pay those millions of dollars that he owed in back taxes, interest, and penalties. That also doesn't happen except for people who are very, very rich. And there are people who are very, very rich who evade a lot of taxes. I've represented a couple of people like that. And you really think, stepping back from it, why didn't this guy just pay his taxes? And there are some people, they haven't read the Constitution, but they sure have a lot of thoughts about the 16th Amendment to the Constitution that requires people to pay federal income taxes. And there are some people who have really adamant, I'm sure you've met them in life, Mark, they have adamant feelings about federal tax obligations. But generally, that doesn't happen. So it was anomalous here that someone came forward. His dad is the president. Everyone said this guy must be wanting to curry favor in some way with the administration because he comes forward. He's a big buddy of Hunter's all of a sudden. I think he buys some of the art, and he also pays off his entire back tax bill. Now, I want to just talk to a minute about, yes, how broad it was. And people are speculating that there are more pardons, including preemptive pardons and very wide pardons coming. And one reason is because this is about the broadest pardon in terms of its language since President Ford pardoned Richard Nixon. Um, and the idea is to make it so broad that they really are picking up that concern that they had years ago, Mark, that it was not just going to be the gun application. It was not, and remember, the gun was actually thrown away. It was never used. That one really was peculiar. It was not just going to be the federal criminal tax charges, but it was going to be some investigation over, this Burisma and what was his relations with China and the whole thing that, in my opinion, the Republican House explored and got nowhere. Remember, they had the informant who blew up in their face. He was going to be like, the big smoking gun, and he smoked out. It didn't end up going anywhere. But they're very worried, and I think they're rightly worried because of what President-elect Trump has said. I mean, we don't have a situation like this where someone has run for president, given public speeches, broadcast all over the nation, all over the world, saying, I'm going to get Cheney. I'm going to get this one. I'm going to get Biden and the Biden crime family. And given that, I do believe, and I'm a sort of an institutionalist myself, and I know it's unusual, but we don't have a lot of guardrails and safeguards against a president like Trump, who comes in announcing that he's going to get people. And then once he's picked Patel, whether Patel gets through or not, Patel has said, I'm going to get people. He wrote a book saying in writing what people he was going to get and how he was going to get people. And given that we don't have a lot of guardrails to that sort of thing, and we don't want to be like a third world country, which I think we're going to be in certain ways under Trump, just like those countries you hear about, where as soon as the opposition is the opposition, they're under constant threat of indictment, arrest, persecution. We're there. And there's a counteraction that an incumbent president like Biden can take, and that is to issue pardons, which are very broad and they're preemptive. And it says Liz Cheney, and then it has the same kind of language that it just had for Hunter Biden, that anything that they engaged in that is allegedly criminal, and it could run up until the time that Biden issues it. Now, could they trump up Patel and this gang? Could they trump up some charges against Cheney after January 20th? Maybe, right? Because he can't give a future pardon. The preemptive pardon says even though there hasn't been even a criminal indictment, even though there haven't been any criminal proceedings, this pardon goes into effect. But you cannot pardon future conduct. If you think about it, that makes a lot of sense. I can't say if you go out and rob a bank tomorrow, you have a pardon. So that's what the preemptive is misunderstood by some people. The broad language is misunderstood by some people. But I think that what Biden should do is he should hold a national address, and that he should show, let's say, Trump on the campaign trail saying that, Cheney ought to be in front of a firing squad, saying, I'm going to get Cheney, then show a clip of Patel saying what he's going to do to Cheney or to the Biden crime family or to Milley, and just show one after the other. Show Trump saying it, show Patel saying it, issue the pardon. Trump saying it, Patel saying it, issue the pardon. Now, Mark, here's another interesting thing. Do you have to accept the pardon?
That's interesting, yeah.
Do you want to get into that one? That one's
yeah,
really...
no, I think that's fascinating. Go ahead. I'd never considered it.
If you look at something like, let's say Carter's amnesty. Carter's amnesty, after President Carter came into office, he gave a blanket pardon to all the so-called draft dodgers from the Vietnam War. They didn't accept those pardons, right? Each draft dodger didn't have to show up and say, I accept the pardon. They didn't have to be sent registered mail to every single person who was going to get the pardon. So that's a precedent. And then there's also been situations of, like, especially African Americans who were railroaded, and it's obvious, many years later that they were railroaded and falsely convicted. And presidents have issued pardons to people who are deceased, right? Well, obviously the deceased people haven't accepted the pardons. So there's really no need to alert the person that you're going to give them a pardon. You just hold that press conference that I said, and you pardon those people. Obviously, there's a lot of people. Just about to be a new Senator Adam Schiff just came out and said issuing such pardons is very defensive and unnecessary, and I don't want one. And Schiff hasn't done anything wrong, but the idea that people are going to be tarred with this idea that, well, you must have done something wrong or else Biden wouldn't have issued the pardon. No, I think people are way past that. I think this idea that people are, looking at these tea leaves and they're saying, oh, I mean, you look at, there was a lot more than tea leaves with President Trump, right? And he got reelected. He just got elected again. And so this idea that people care so much about democracy and process and, oh my goodness, they'll never vote for, I don't know, some member of Congress. There's some member of Congress who thinks he's on the firing line because of things that Trump has said. And I think he has come out and said that he wants a pardon, okay? He probably doesn't have a huge war chest, Mark. At the very least, if Patel or whoever he puts in there as head of the FBI, they're going to bounce. The job's not open, Mark. There's a 10-year term for FBI director.
Right,
and there's
right.
3 years left to go on the guy that Trump appointed. But he's not good enough. He's not loyal enough. So they got to yank him out, which I don't think he's cooperating with. And thank God for the FBI director that he's not cooperating.
No, he should make him fire him, of course.
Absolutely.
Let me just ask you, though, to get you back on the pardon thing, and bring you around to what this what was asked in the chat. It was asked, can you? Here is Jim saying, can you ask David Katz if he believes Biden will issue wide-scale pardons to Trump's enemies, e.g., Adam Schiff, judges in his court cases, military leaders, etc.? It's what you're talking about right now, but I just want you to touch on this. And also, it seems to me like the language is very important here. Wide-scale pardons, okay. But what kind of pardons? You just explained that you can't have pardons that you sort of give you a get-out-of-jail-free card going forward. But what sort of pardons might he bestow upon many of these members of Congress, and how many can he? And can it be what they're calling a pocket pardon? Explain to me. You've just said that you don't have to announce that the pardon is being given, and it doesn't have to be officially accepted by the person. What are then the parameters that these pardons fall under?
It's one of the broadest and unchecked presidential powers that there is. It goes back to the kings and queens of England, and the idea that the king or queen could show mercy. People said, well, nobody thought that this was going to happen at the time, like let's say a Trump self-pardon. But the reality is George Mason, he's very famous. People talk about Hamilton and Madison. But George Mason was very famous too, and his bloc thought this was a terrible idea. They thought this idea of pardons was terrible. They said a lot of the pardons will end up being used by the president to pardon his own conduct and the conduct of his cronies. But Hamilton and Madison won the day. There was a lot of controversy, and people say, "Oh my God, they never thought that this would happen." There was some pretty good. They were pretty good at foreseeing the future. There were a few Katzadamuses, real Nostradamuses in what we call the founding fathers, and they saw this problem happening because they saw the rise of tyrants. They saw someone like Trump coming to power, and what they would do to keep power. And so, because Biden is the president now. Again, as I say, he should issue those pardons. Now, a pocket pardon, people love that expression. The idea is that you don't announce it at all. What I was saying was that Biden doesn't have to announce at all that he's going to do it ahead of time. He doesn't have to go to each person he's going to pardon and say, do you want a pardon, and make an historical record that the person said yes or no. Both of them have their own inconveniences, Mark, right? So one idea is to just, as I say, announce on national TV, these are the people getting the pardon, and do that before January 20th of next year. But a true pocket pardon would be that he writes out, and in the old days before typewriters, the old pardons, if you ever look at them, are actually written out from George Washington till they had typewriters. But anyway, it would be typed out, and it would be given to the person, and like Liz Cheney would walk around, and she would have in her pocket her pardon. And if she's ever told that she's a target of a federal criminal investigation, she'll say to the FBI agent who presumes to, accost her, to interrogate her, say, "Here's my pardon issued by President Biden on January 15th." That is not realistic. There has to be an official record. I mean, it has to be in the Federal Register. It has to be. I mean, someone would challenge even the authenticity of it if it were such a pocket pardon. You would put it in 3 or 4 other places, but that wouldn't work. The idea that nobody would know until she took it out of her pocket. People thought that maybe that's what Trump had done. Trump had pardoned himself last time he was in there toward the end of his term, and he had in his pocket. Well, he got indicted, and I believe quite appropriately, on two different federal charges, and he never did take out his pocket pardon, because that didn't happen. In terms of the broad language, and there are a lot of commentators, especially on the right now, who are saying this is so unprecedented. How could Biden have done such things? So unprecedented. It just about followed the language of Ford's pardon of Nixon, which said, for the things that happened, in other words, there's a time limit. So it's the time limit was while Nixon was president. The time limit for Biden's son was 10 years ago, up until the day that he issued it, December 1st, 2024. What I'm saying about it, the pardon can't pardon future conduct, is that pardon can't pardon anything as of December 2nd. Or if Nixon had committed a crime after he was out of office, that could have been prosecuted.
So the key here is that it goes back but it goes back over that extended period, right, David?
Right. For Hunter Biden, 10 years. For Nixon, the entire time that he was president, throughout the Watergate scandal. And it was written in a way where it didn't say, for obstructing justice. It didn't say for, witness tampering as to Nixon. It really did have broad language that would have applied to just about anything that Nixon would have been charged with for the time that he was president.
So the reality is that Joe Biden may Johnny Appleseed these pardons sort of across the legislative landscape because of what you've described as the unapologetic way in which the president-elect is targeting people, and he seems to be backed up by all of those who are running the agencies that would be charged with doing that, with going after these people, FBI, Justice Department, et cetera.
If President Biden had done it a different way, if he had, let's say, once Kash Patel was announced, I mean, that was a remarkable event, that even if Biden truly meant that he was not going to issue a pardon to his son at the time that he said he was not going to issue a pardon to his son, even if he had really meant that sincerely at the time, there was a change of circumstances once Trump put forward Gates, who promised revenge. And, if the Republican senators hadn't stood up to him, he'd be our new attorney general. The Democrats had no ability to stop him. You think, my God, Trump was willing to do that. What else is he willing to do? And now this Kash Patel, which involves yanking the FBI director out of there or inventing some cause for him. If they're going to invent some cause to try to remove a Republican FBI director picked by Trump, if they're going to try to invent that cause, there is absolutely good grounds. And you argue to the American people, look, this guy is going to concoct stuff against his rivals and his enemies, and they have a right to be his rivals and enemies while he's in office. That's the whole point of an opposition. And to make those people cringe, and you say, well, people might have cringed before. No one ever said, anybody out there on the right who supports Trump, let them call in or write in or send an email. Who is the person who ever campaigned on the kind of rhetoric that Trump did this time? He did a little bit in 2016, lock her up, all those rallies against Hillary Clinton. He did. And then the people who say, well, he didn't actually indict Hillary Clinton the first time that he was in office. Well, first of all, he had two reasonable attorneys general. I mean, I didn't like a lot of things that Sessions and Barr did at the time, but do I think that they were unstintingly loyal the way this Bondi will be to Trump? No, I don't think they were. And he had other guardrails the first time that he was in there. So I think that it absolutely makes sense. Now, you said, how many pardons can he, Johnny Appleseed out there? And the reality is that he can do a lot of pardons. When we had Iran-Contra, some people don't remember that. This is George, not W, but his dad. His dad, there was this Iran-Contra thing, and people like Caspar Weinberger were involved in it. Very high officials were involved in it. And over 20 of them were pardoned on Bush's dad's way out. He pardoned over 20 of those people. So that's a lot of people, specific people. And as I said, there have been these blanket pardons like that Carter issued for all the alleged draft dodgers. So if he picked 20 people, and I think some of them are Milley, some of them are
Schiff, Milley, Cheney, etc. Milley would have a military court exposure, though, wouldn't he, David Katz, that might not be covered by a pardon?
We are deep into a real life coup if there are going to be military officers, because it's a military tribunal, who would convict I think that the security that Milley has from court martial is that no members of the military. I mean, here's the funny thing about the military, and it's so funny because generally speaking, I think there's too much of a military industrial complex. I think we spend too much on the military as compared with domestic priorities. But we have wonderful people in the military just in terms of character. They may have a different worldview and they come at things differently from you, me, some of many of your audience. But they're honorable people in that old-fashioned sense of honor. So I don't think that Milley has to worry that 3 or 4 officers are going to find him guilty of some trumped-up charges. But jury trials are a different thing. The idea that jury trials are there's some guardrail. It's wonderful that we have jury trials, but obviously Trump and his minions, legal minions, would pick some jurisdiction they thought was very overly fair to them. I mentioned the other day, if you want to sue X, Twitter, Musk makes you sue in the Northern District of Texas. He's not even in. They're not even in. They're in like around the Dallas. They're in a different district. Okay, but they pick these totally favorable districts. That's where they would try to indict people. And the Democrats were so fair. Jack Smith was so fair, maybe overly fair. He brought that case about Mar-a-Lago down in Florida when he absolutely had venue in Washington, D.C. I just read another case the other day from a circuit court, which made clear that there's venue in the place where the obstruction is intended to occur, not necessarily where you move the boxes. And
no, that's crazy. I mean, if that were, then you could always move the boxes to some place where you knew the judge or whatever. I don't know. It's crazy. It was utterly absurd.
Move them to France. Move them to France and make them charge you in France.
Thank you. On the Milley thing, just to wrap it up, James says, can't the president remove military officers who aren't loyal? The president can remove military officers whether or not they're loyal. He can just go, can he? I mean, I believe the president has full liberty in terms of removing military officers, doesn't he?
If he moved ones who were high up, there'd be a congressional inquiry. You got to remember, Congress has its own prerogatives, and these senators have their senatorial prerogatives. They're not about to give up power. They're not going to say, "Oh, President of the United States comes along." Those high military officers, they're backed by certain senators. I'm not saying for corrupt reasons, because they think that particular military officer is particularly good, worthy of being a 5-star, general or whatever. So I think that that's pretty fraught trying to remove them. Of course, what's scary is if you have the Defense Department, which gets us back to Hegseth. And that was one of the reasons to be scared, not just that he's way in over his head trying to run that job and the sexual impropriety and alcoholism allegations against him. Not putting all of that aside, you wonder what was in it for Trump. And what seems to be in it for Trump is that he hopes that he will remove, as Secretary of Defense, he'll cooperate in removing military officers or making their life miserable or sort of softening the military up. And people are really scared for some coup type thing that Trump has in mind. If you think that I'm like, just how can I be thinking of that? I take you back to January 6th and what happened on January 6th. How does General Flynn's, the pardoned General Flynn's, how does his brother end up answering the phone over when they're trying to get the National Guard over to the marauding of the Capitol, which is being seized and overrun at that moment? How does it get delayed so much? And how does he answer the phone? And there'd be a lot more people that I don't think the American public would like to have answering the phone if this guy Hegseth became head of the Department of Defense. And that seems to be what Trump is angling for.
That's exactly right. I mean, and what David's talking about is the Flynn conspiracy is real. And the fact that his brother was really allowed to skate in the ways that he was, and Flynn himself. I mean, it's a remarkable thing. And they continue to be really pernicious elements in this future Trump administration. I mean, I put Eric Prince in the same category for different reasons. I mean, dangerous characters in my view. Quickly, I only have a couple of minutes, and I think we've kind of talked about the pardon thing and gotten a good perspective on it. But again, mad respect to you for bringing it to the attention of the audience many, many, many months ago. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.